Parliament finally does what it says on the tin, a debate about debating the most important change for the country in generations. But MPs still won't get a vote on Brexit.
Asking ourselves what bits of membership we want to retain. We're saying what is the right relationship for the UK to have to the maximum benefit of our economy and citizens of this country.
Good evening. For months we've been told Brexit means Brexit, but the first time today the representatives and the mother of all parliaments were finally allowed to ask, well, what the hell is it? But after hours of debate, Theresa May still didn't offer MPs a vote on the divorce package. Mrs May has told her ministers to refrain from a running commentary on the business of Brexit, but that hasn't stopped the pound from hanging on her every word. Like a souffle, it rose before it fell.
Also on tonight's programme, Russia's defiance as eastern Aleppo is pulverised. As dozens more die, one lucky soul is pulled out of the rubble alive. Children who have fled war in Syria and beyond hope their luck will turn in the Calais refugee camp. But while governments dither, many have gone missing or died. And we talk to grieving parents as MPs prepare to debate why Britain has one of the worst rates of stillbirth in the developed world.
We had a small funeral with just 8 people there with him. And that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, was walk out, leaving him.
And climate change. Most of us know it's happening. Politicians keep trying to do something about it, but it takes a jolt to energise the debate. Our science editor has been to the Arctic Circle to deliver one. It's been another record year of warmth, and at the current rate, there will be no sea ice left in the Arctic by 2045.
That thunderous crash is an absolutely enormous piece of ice carving off the front of this glacier.
David Davis has accused banks and other European countries of a blame Brexit festival as more conservative tensions over Europe emerged. MPs joining the call for a vote on the government's Brexit plan, while Labour declared its closed and secretive strategy was causing huge anxiety and spooking the markets. Well, the pound shot up against the dollar overnight, gaining 2 cents as investors initially liked the sound of more parliamentary involvement in the Brexit process. But those gains ebbed away throughout the day, particularly during the Commons debate, as traders sensed that there wasn't going to be a major shift in the government's position. Still, sterling ended with the biggest gains against the dollar for a whole month. Here's Kieran Jenkins.
Just 111 days have passed since the referendum. Now the questions really are raining down on the Prime Minister, not least this one.
Should MPs have the final say, Prime Minister?
Not likely. MPs won't be allowed to veto Britain's position before triggering Article 50, but they will get a full parliamentary debate.
Jeremy Corbyn.
That gave Labour something to cheer about, and at Jeremy Corbyn's first PMQ since his re-election, he went after the fundamentals of what sort of Brexit the Prime Minister wants.
Can the Prime Minister now confirm that access to the single market is a red line for the government, or is it not?
Well, the right honourable gentleman has asked me this question before, and yes, he says it's a simple question, and I will give him the simple answer. What we are going to do is deliver on the vote of the British people to leave the European Union. What we are going to do is be ambitious in our negotiations to negotiate the best deal for the British people, and that will include the maximum possible access to the European market for firms to trade with and operate within the European market.
Well, insisting that Brexit means Brexit just about got the Prime Minister through the summer, but there's now growing pressure on both sides of the House for much, much more. Mrs May wouldn't even say, for example, whether Britain should be in or out of the single market. Now, holding that position, even in the short term, will be difficult, if not impossible. A galvanised Labour Party has published 170 questions on Brexit, some of which reeled out this afternoon when the Commons held a debate about holding a Brexit debate.
I have accepted, I've stood here and accepted there's a mandate for exit. There is no mandate for the terms. It's never been put to the country It's never been put to the country. It's not even been put to the Secretary of State's political party, and it's not been put to this House.
If you tell your negotiator, your opposite number in negotiation, exactly what your priorities are, exactly what your top priority is, then it will make that top priority extremely expensive.
But even on the Tory benches, they leapt up to demand exactly that detail, as it dawned that leaving means something different to each of them.
My position is abundantly clear, and it's absolutely correct. You cannot be in both the single market and repeal the 1972 Act.
Few places should be more impatient to leave than Thurrock. 72% voted out.
When we said we were going to go, we should have left.
So it should have happened like the morning after, you reckon?
Yeah.
So are MPs meddling or doing their job?
Well, they represent the country, don't they? They represent the people of Great Britain. We haven't got anyone else to represent us, so it lies in their hands.
Who's holding it up?
Well, it's Parliament, isn't it? I mean, it's going to take them a couple of years to sort it, we know. But, I mean, they need to get on with it.
Parliament may not have a vote, but it will have a debate. And by then, possibly, some answers.
Well, in Westminster now, hot from the EU debate are the shadow Brexit Secretary, Keir Starmer, and the Conservative MP, Kwasi Kwarteng, who campaigned to leave the EU. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming on the programme. How wonderful to have you standing next to each other like this.
Thank you.
Kwasi Kwarteng, if I could start with you.
Sure.
Will you be campaigning as a member of Parliament of the sovereign body for a vote on Article 50, for a vote on Brexit?
I don't think we need to have an actual vote on Brexit, because if you want to vote on Article 50, the only reason you could want that vote is, I think, if you wanted to overturn the verdict of the referendum. I don't see why, if the mechanism to leave the EU is Article 50 and people have voted to leave the EU, I don't see why we need another vote on that.
So what is the point of parliamentarians when it comes to deciding the future of the nation on this very important issue, if you can't even vote on it?
Well, I think there's a whole host of things. I mean, the people decided that we're going to leave the EU, but the terms, the nature of the discussions, the negotiations, issues like the single market, these are things that the representatives of the people in Parliament, I think, have the duty, actually, to discuss.
Is that because you're afraid that you might lose the vote with a slim majority?
No, I don't think we would lose the vote. What I'm saying is that the referendum was definitive. 52% voted to leave the EU, and that's exactly what we'll be doing. And the mechanism by which we leave the EU happens to be the invocation of Article 50. So I don't see what the controversy is about that.
Keir Starmer, do you agree with that?
No, what we need is to know the plans that the government is going to put forward and to be able to scrutinise them. And today is a big victory, because we were arguing for scrutiny. We were saying that the government must bring the plans to Parliament and allow us to see them and to question them on the plans. Now, they've never conceded that before. They conceded it just 10 minutes ago in the Chamber. So that's a really big step forward on scrutiny. We then need to move at some stage to a vote, because there's no mandate about the terms for leaving the EU. There's a mandate to leave, but the basis upon which we leave is critically important. It's going to be a decision that affects generations to come. It affects the economy, business and working people. And we must know the terms. All we know from the referendum is that we're leaving.
Well, talking about terms, Keir Starmer, what exactly are the terms that your party favours? Because there's an awful lot of ambiguity on the Labour side as well. I mean, where exactly do you stand on the single market? Where do you stand on the freedom of movement of people?
Well, I don't think there is any ambiguity. We've just had a 6 or 7 hour debate with many contributions, and repeatedly the Labour Party representatives have said access to the single market and an adjustment to freedom of movement. There are plenty of other issues, of course, on security, counter-terrorism, Northern Ireland, but obviously they're the main issues, and we've had clarity and we've had unanimity pretty much in the Chamber all afternoon.
But hang on a minute, you said an adjustment to the freedom of movement of people. I mean, what exactly does that adjustment mean? Diane Abbott is suggesting we should just continue allowing people in. Rachel Reeves, on the other hand, has said if that were the case, there'd be riots in the streets. So where do you stand?
We have to accept that there are many people who are concerned about immigration and freedom of movement. and an adjustment to the rules in light of the result has to at least be part of the negotiations. Obviously those negotiations need to be shrewd, they need to be clever, but we need the best deal for the economy and for jobs. And what's astonishing is that the Prime Minister is not putting the economy first, and I think that's the critical reason that we need to see the plans.
OK, well, let me talk to Kwasi Kwarteng. I mean, we see the pound literally hanging on every one of the Prime Minister's words. It rose, it fell, it rose today. I mean, this ambiguity in your party, in the government, is really damaging the economy, isn't it?
I don't think there's any ambiguity. I think the fact is there was a referendum, a clear, decisive result in favour of leaving the EU. And when the Prime Minister said Brexit means Brexit, people laughed, but that's exactly what it means. What it doesn't mean is staying in the EU on the terms that we've been in it for 40 years. So there's going to be change. I think people are going through a grieving process on both sides of the House. They feel aggrieved, they're upset. I can fully understand that. But we're certainly moving forward. I think the people generally want us to get on with it. And I look forward to leaving the EU in 2 or 3 years.
But crucially, Kwasi Kwarteng, has the government rather now conceded that there will be parliamentary scrutiny of the process?
I don't think the government ever questioned the fact that Brexit is a huge step in our country's history. And of course, given that we are a parliamentary democracy, there would be ample scope for wide debate, questions, arguments, conversation, discussions, you name it, about the nature of Brexit. I can assure you that we will be here for very, very many
why not go the whole,
weeks
hang on a second.
and years discussing this issue.
Why not go the whole hog and have a vote? Otherwise, you're just going to be a talking shop. You know better than the Iranian parliament.
Well, we are actually going to have a vote. We're going to have a vote, as everyone knows, as has been said a number of times, on the Great Repeal Bill. We're going to repeal the 1972 European Communities Act, and we're going to leave the EU.
But that is a vote on what happens after we've exited. We want a vote on what the basic terms of negotiation are, and they really matter. They matter, and they're causing great uncertainty. The government has rightly accepted that the plans will now be put before Parliament. They've never said that before, and they'll be scrutinised. That is a big step in the right direction.
OK, let me ask you one other question on foreign policy. So yesterday, Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, welcomed the idea of demonstrations outside the Russian embassy over Syria. Today, a senior Labour spokesman called for demonstrations outside the American embassy. Is this the future of British foreign policy, demonstrating outside embassies in London?
Well, John, you'll have to forgive me. I've been in the chamber all day long, and I've come straight out to do this interview, so I'm really not in a position to deal with what's been going on today. Because
do you think it's a good idea? Should we demonstrate outside the American embassy?
John, I just don't know
Matt,
what has been proposed or hasn't been proposed. Matt, I'm so sorry.
OK. All right, Kwasi Kwarteng, what do you think?
I don't think government ministers necessarily calling for demonstrations is that usual. I saw Boris Johnson make those remarks. I think he's got grave and important concerns about the behaviour of the Russians in Syria. And I think it was, for him legitimate to raise those concerns. I don't know. I'm not someone. I'm not a naturally a person who demonstrates on the streets necessarily. But I think he expressed his displeasure very clearly.
OK. Thanks to both of you, Kwasi Kwarteng, Keir Starmer. Thanks a lot. Kathy.
Thanks, Matt. Now, another 25 people have been killed in heavy airstrikes on the Syrian city of Aleppo, most of them reportedly as they tried to buy food at a marketplace. Western leaders have united to condemn Syria and Russia over the latest onslaught, accusing them of war crimes by targeting civilians. But Moscow remains defiant, describing the Foreign Secretary's call for protests outside their embassy as shameful. And just to warn you, there are some distressing images in this report from our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson.
This is West Aleppo, and the story heard less often. These pictures filmed by Russian television. Hassan, born deaf and mute, mimes the sudden explosion. The blast blew his leg off. Yet another civilian in West Aleppo maimed by apparently indiscriminate shelling of civilian areas from rebel groups in the east. Cross now into the besieged east of the city. Same story, but much intensified. Lost in the agony of losing family who were killed. These images filmed by pro-opposition TV. May God punish you and your children, Russia and Iran, the man says. But in the east, civilians are getting killed and maimed, not just from shells from Iranian militias and the government army, but also, of course, by the daily bombs dropped by the Syrian and Russian air forces, intensified yesterday and today after a lull. And it's not just Aleppo, of course. Douma in East Damascus hit today. The West says it's a war crime. Russia and Syria say rebels use civilians as human shields. The blood-soaked truth, both are probably right. Channel 4 News asked a group of medics in East Aleppo about this diplomatic car crash as the world talks about solutions without finding one.
We need more actions, really help us to eliminate from Bashar and trail him as a war criminal.
I'm not optimistic, but there will be developments if there is international action. Talking about taking Assad to court for war crimes, that is encouraging.
I think Russia will continue to kill the Syrian people. Europe and the rest of the world will condemn them, but those are just words.
Vladimir Putin today blamed the West for sabotaging any possible UN ceasefire deal for Aleppo.
No one talked to us or discussed anything with us. They just rammed through the resolution in the UN Security Council, obviously waiting for our veto. It was done to get this veto. But why? To exacerbate the situation and to whip up an anti-Russia hysteria.
The Russian strategy, brutal and simple. The West won campaigns changing regimes in Iraq, Afghanistan and Libya, then catastrophically lost the peace. Russia wants to win war and reimpose the Assad regime. The siege and slaughter tactic has worked for Moscow and Assad in Daraya, pulverized near Damascus. And in Old Homs, the country's third biggest city. And it appears now to be working in Aleppo, Syria's biggest city. But at what cost? All the West seems able to do is announce what it can't do.
The scenes we see of the indiscriminate slaughter of innocent civilians are absolutely appalling. We want to see an end to that, but there are many questions about a no-fly zone.
Meanwhile, Russia senses it's now turning the war around, winning against what it sees as a global jihadi menace. If civilians pay the price with their blood, so be it. For now, President Putin calculates the end justifies the means.
And to see all of our reports from Inside Aleppo, go to InsideAleppo.com. Matt.
Thanks. Now, it is still shrouded in taboo, a personal tragedy which largely remains hidden from view. But there are more than 3,500 stillbirths every year, and another 2,000 babies die shortly after they're born. In fact, Britain has one of the worst stillbirth rates across the world's wealthiest countries. MPs will debate the issue tomorrow as campaigners say too many deaths are preventable and too little is being done to find out what went wrong and what can be done about it. Our social affairs editor, Jackie Long, has this report.
He's the centre of our family life.
Tending the apple tree planted in memory of her son, a baby who never drew breath.
People say, you must be getting over it now. It's like, no, you don't get over losing a child. The grief, it's always a part of you, it never goes away.
Sarah's son Toby died just minutes before he was born. She and her husband Matt watched horrified as the baby's heartbeat disappeared from the monitor. Waking up from an emergency caesarean, she says the reality sank in.
And then I held him and I remember feeling he was so cold. He shouldn't have been cold. Matt said he felt him warm when he first held him, because they brought him out to Matt very quickly when they realised that they couldn't do anything for him. And Matt held him, and I remember him saying that he felt him go cold, and he tried to keep him warm by cuddling him, and he couldn't. And that was hard. We had a good time with him, a decent quality. They weren't stopping us having him, but it wasn't enough, it never would be. I'd give anything to have just another 5 minutes with him.
That's something you never anticipate doing, is it?
After months preparing for his birth, Sarah and her husband were faced with getting ready for Toby's funeral.
We had a small funeral with just 8 people there with him. And that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, was walk out, leaving him. Because no mum should ever have to leave her son or her daughter, her child, her baby, to do that, to go on that journey of their own.
It was found Toby's growth had been restricted after Sarah's placenta failed. She's convinced it should have been spotted by a midwife in the days running up to his death, and says concerns she raised were brushed aside.
I was like, something's wrong. I don't know what, but something's wrong, and I was begging to be induced. I stated that I was not happy to be left until I was 12 days overdue. I said that to my GP, I said it to midwife, and I was still left.
The hospital carried out an internal investigation. She and her husband were not asked to take part, which according to the stillbirth charity SANS is not unusual. Latest figures show around 3,500 babies are stillborn every year. In a survey of bereaved parents, just under a third were told the hospital was reviewing their baby's death. Of those, only 34% said they were invited to take part, and only half said they were satisfied with the process.
Too many women are told that their concerns are unfounded and sent home, only for their baby to die soon afterwards.
The MP Patricia Gibson speaks from bitter personal experience. After 5 years of fertility treatment and a textbook pregnancy, she went into hospital the day the baby was due with crippling pain. Initially turned away, she went back, was given morphine, put to bed and left.
Looking back on it, you know, there are moments when I reproach myself for not asking more questions. But at the time, because I'd been made to feel like a burden, because I was being made to feel that I was giving the nursing staff work that was really, they were too busy to deal with this, and why couldn't I just do what I was told and go home and be quiet? I just went along with what they were telling me to do, and I didn't ask perhaps the questions that I should have asked, and that, you know, I live with that.
And that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
When she was eventually seen by a doctor, she was told her baby had died. Despite asking for a caesarean, the hospital tried to induce labour. After 48 hours, Patricia's liver ruptured and she too nearly died. When she finally regained consciousness, she saw her son Kenneth for the first and only time.
They brought the baby in and it was awful. It was lovely, it was perfect. Sorry. He looked like he was sleeping. You would never have thought that this baby was dead. He just, you know, he had a wee glow about his face, and he was a big boy. I have to say, you know, I've always thought that when babies are born, they all look pretty much the same. But he had a head of hair, and he was a spitting image of his father. I've never seen a baby who looked so much like his father. And it just seemed such a waste.
So what, in essence, does this independent report say that you had commissioned?
After waiting 2 years for an investigation promised by the hospital, Patricia commissioned independent specialists who found that her baby's death was caused by a series of errors and could have been avoided. Eventually, the Health Board in Scotland settled out of court, but Patricia says it's time all stillbirths were investigated independently by a coroner.
Health boards and hospital trusts and hospitals need to be open about the failings. If failings have taken place, they need to be open about them, because I don't see how else you can improve if there's a culture of cover-up and secrecy when mistakes have been made.
Sarah's son would be 5 now, Patricia's 7 tomorrow. Both women would like to see better care and understanding for parents of stillborn babies, mothers to children who will never grow up, but who'll always be remembered.
If anyone mentions him, it just makes my heart skip a beat. It's like someone remembers him, someone's thinking about him.
I've still got his room, so it's a room, if you like, frozen in time, but I won't let it become a shrine, because he's not in that room. You know, he's up here and he's in our hearts, and but I just haven't get around to dealing with it because it seems so final, you know. But I suppose I'll deal with it eventually. in my own time.
Patricia Gibson, MP, ending that report by Jackie Long. Well, joining me now is Max Dobson. He and his wife also lost their son after he was stillborn. Also here is MP Antoinette Sandbach. Her baby died a few days after he was born. She now chairs a parliamentary group tackling baby loss. Welcome to you both. That must have been a very painful watch indeed. Max, I mean, tell us about your story.
Yes, so our son Hamish was stillborn in 2014 at full term. It seemed like it was a perfect pregnancy until my wife noticed she hadn't felt any movements for a while. That after she went overdue, we went into the hospital and they put on the monitor and they couldn't find a heartbeat. Then obviously we went through the unimaginable trauma of giving birth to our dead son. We were just told it was just one of those things that just happens. It's really sad, but it just happens. And it was only later that we found out that was not the case at all. And actually, there were a series of errors made and missed opportunities to save his life.
And did you have any warning beforehand that something might go wrong?
No. So I genuinely had no idea that after the 20-week scan, if that came back clear, then unless there was some sort of complication in birth, that anything could go wrong. So it's just complete shock. And then when later you find out the true scale of stillbirth, in this country in particular, I was just astounded.
Antoinette Sandbach, I saw you nodding throughout that story. I mean, it's just so heartrending, isn't it, all of it?
Well, the thing is that we know that we could be saving babies' lives, and that's one of the reasons why we are talking in Baby Loss Awareness Week and trying to raise the issues around stillbirth, miscarriage and neonatal death, because we know that there is some really good practice out there. There are some very good midwives, there are very good consultants. There are hospitals that do the best
So why
practice.
are the numbers so bad? I mean, 3,600 plus 2,000. I mean, it's terrible.
Because there's been a culture of silence about talking about child loss, and partly it's because parents aren't coming forward. They feel that.
Why is that?
I think you're so shocked. You're dealing with grief. You're dealing with shock, you're dealing with the dashing of your hopes and dreams for the future. And at that point, to be asked to step up to the plate and to try and ask the detailed questions that need to be asked following a death of a baby is quite difficult.
But you must have felt really robbed when your son died.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Did you feel that need to kind of stay quiet about it, or did you want to have answers immediately? Did you feel angry as well?
So we wanted answers, but there is an incredible taboo about stillbirth. You talk to people and they just don't know what to say, so it's very difficult actually to kind of have an open conversation about it. But that's why things like Baby Loss Week, Awareness Week is so important in terms of raising awareness. But for us, it was about finding answers and about we thought that the hospital would share the same interest we had in establishing what went wrong and trying to prevent this from happening to anyone else.
They didn't?
And they didn't. No, so because he was stillborn antenatally, he doesn't have any human rights, there's no coroner's investigation, and they're not obliged to investigate it.
This is the point. Would you have wanted a coroner's investigation on this?
Yes. Well, so yes, I would have done. And at the moment, the law prevents coroners from investigating, and that's really important because it's really important that the people who look at these deaths are independent of the people who are actually involved in the care.
And Antoinette Sandbach, do you think the law should be changed to get coroners involved?
I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. For example, Max was saying that he wasn't given any information after the 20-week scan about what could go wrong. We need to have much more public information around not smoking during pregnancy, about counting the kicks and reduced fetal movement. That's something that could be done relatively simply, it could be done quickly, and it needs to be given to all at-risk parents.
But would you want the coroners also to get involved, or at least have the prospect of that concentrating the hospital's minds?
What I want is for there to be proper investigation of stillbirth deaths in hospital. Whether that needs to be done by a coroner, we have a shortage of child pathologists, but we need to have a change of culture in hospitals. We know that 1,000 babies a year are dying in the stage effectively around the last trimester and labour. And we need to make sure that the causes of that are identified and addressed.
So, Max, what would you like Parliament to do?
So I would like Parliament, firstly, to look at the standard of antenatal care around the country. There's too much inconsistency. There have been some measures to roll out consistent standards, but hospitals aren't obliged to implement them, and many of them aren't. And the second thing is there has to be more investigation of stillbirths, whether that's through coroners or whether that's through hospitals investigating.
And can Parliament deliver that?
Well, I think that we're having a 3-hour debate tomorrow. We're putting the minister on the spot.
Is that unprecedented, by the way?
That I think the first there have been debates. You saw Patricia speak in a debate on stillbirth, but it's unprecedented. It's on the floor of the House of Commons in the main debating chamber. We have MPs contributing cross-party. The important thing is we've really raised the bar, and we are now asking serious questions. The all-party group are pursuing child loss, whether it's miscarriage, stillbirth, ectopic pregnancy. And we, as I told the Secretary of State today, will be holding his feet to the fire on this issue.
I hope so. Antoinette Sambach, Max Dobson, thank you very much for coming in. And if you've been affected by any of the issues raised by our film or indeed our discussion, do go to channel4.com/support. Thanks. Kathy.
Some Brexit-related news just in. A report tonight says that Tesco has pulled dozens of products from sale online, like Ben & Jerry's ice cream, because of a row with the manufacturing giant Unilever. The Financial Times says they can't agree who should pay the higher cost of importing the goods caused by the fall in the value of sterling. Now, this year could well become the warmest on record, and nowhere has felt the effects more than the Arctic. In fact, if carbon emissions don't stop increasing, the permanent sea ice at the North Pole could completely disappear in 30 years' time. Our science editor, Tom Clark, has been to Norway's Svalbard Islands in the high Arctic, where he joined climate scientists in the research station in Ny-Ålesund, the world's most northerly town.
This could be the warmest year on record, and this is what it looks like in one of the coldest places on Earth. The Arctic summer has come to an end, yet there's no snow on the ground. Instead, the night before it rained, and the temperature is several degrees above the sub-freezing average for early autumn. Of course, that's just weather. It varies all the time. But there's a rumble, like distant thunder, that speaks of a more profound change. The sound echoes around Ny-Ålesund, one of the world's most northerly research outposts. If you travel from there a few miles up the fjord, you reach the icebergs that are carving off the front of the Kronbreen Glacier. Glaciers carve like this every season, but this year's high temperatures mean it's more active than anyone can remember. The wall of ice is as tall as a block of flats, and we've been told to stay back because of flying boulders of ice. We just saw another huge piece of this glacier, which is quite literally melting before our very eyes. That thunderous crash is an absolutely enormous piece of ice carving off the front of this glacier. Our guide is Kim Holmen of the Norwegian Polar Institute. He's carrying a flare gun and rifle to ward off polar bears. If they don't work, his trademark hat, knitted by a grateful student, might do the trick.
The landscape is very different from what it used to be. It is extremely active and at the same time serene, so it's a fascinating place. I notice in springtime that the snow melts earlier. I noticed the warm air we're standing in right now. So wherever I look, there is very obvious change that I have experienced myself.
We're carefully picking our way over the ice and mud. It's dangerous going. The melting glacier can leave deep voids beneath the ground.
Where we stand right now, right at the fringe of the glacier, used to be nice solid glacier, and across the fjord there, the hill you see we used to have picnics on top of that little mound and watch the calving which was happening right beside us.
It's less of a picnic spot now, just slabs of ice left behind by the glacier, surrounded by a muddy moraine. Best estimates are that the ice has retreated a kilometre in less than a decade. Each time another chunk carves off the glacier. This one, the size of a house, it sends waves breaking across the otherwise still fjord. All the ice in the sea around us has fallen off the glacier in these warmer months. But in winter, this entire fjord typically froze over with ice a metre thick. But for the last few years, it hasn't frozen at all. On average, Svalbard used to be surrounded by sea ice during the long Arctic winter. But for years, the sea ice has been in retreat, and this winter it reached the lowest level in the satellite record, leaving the islands almost completely free of ice year-round. Arctic ice reflects the sun's energy back into space, so the more ice that's lost, the warmer the Arctic Ocean becomes. It's a vicious circle that could raise sea levels and melt Arctic permafrost, causing more warming still. What happens in the Arctic doesn't necessarily stay in the Arctic. Some scientists have claimed links between the UK's severe winter storms of 2014 and warming at the pole. The extreme cold snap and snow in the North American polar vortex of the same year was also linked to warmer Arctic weather. The scientific consensus is that if we continue as we are, there will be no summer sea ice in the Arctic around 30 years from now. In places like Svalbard, there's a whole ecosystem of creatures that depend on ice to survive.
These species, fish, birds, plants, have nowhere to go. There is no land north of us, and which means that we're at the terminus and we are losing some species.
Next month, 190 countries meet in Marrakesh to haggle over how to implement last year's Paris climate deal. Its ambitious target is to keep global warming below 2 degrees. It will help, but it's nowhere near enough to stop the Arctic getting warmer still. However fast we act, it's time to come to terms with a new north.
And tomorrow night, Tom will be looking at the emerging conflict between conservationists and fishermen as valuable cod and haddock move into a new ocean created by the receding polar ice.
Demolition is imminent. Now a group of social workers have arrived at the Calais jungle camp to help the 178 unaccompanied child refugees who are eligible to join relatives in the UK. With no one to look out for them, some 18 children have already gone missing, and several have died trying to find their way to a safe place. Parag O'Brien reports.
2 young women discuss life in the jungle camp Calais. Candace, a volunteer. The other teenager we're calling Helen. When her mother passed away 2 years ago, she left home in Ethiopia. She arrived here a month ago on her own. We get glimpses of a traumatic life over her 16 years. But the story she wants to tell Candice just happened on Sunday.
If you've seen in the news, an Eritrean couple were killed when they were trying, and she was there when it happened.
An Eritrean couple trying to jump lorries were hit by a British motorist in front of Helen. The man died, the stuff of nightmares.
And he died immediately while his wife suffered, and that's really, really something that she's found to be difficult. And also in the evenings she can't really sleep because she thinks of the jungle, the forest outside here and the noises and that feeling of terror. So that doesn't leave her.
Is that how she describes it, a feeling of terror?
Yeah, Chaka.
Official figures on unaccompanied minors commissioned by the French ahead of camp demolition were released today. There are 1,300 children who are alone here. 95% of them, like Helen, want to reach the UK, and just over 500 said they had family in Britain. The figure's less clear, a page stuck to the wall in the kids' cafe, the lost ones. The Home Secretary indicated this week that the UK would take around 300 children ahead of the camp demolition. As we speak, a team of 25 social workers from the UK are interviewing children all around this camp with a view to speeding up that process, because time is of the essence. The clock is ticking. French media today reported that the dismantling of the camp is likely to start not next week, but the week after. What will happen to those children? Well, we know that a large amount will be relocated to the UK. Some more will be found homes here in France. For the rest, they will be moved into the container city here behind me, because during that eviction, things are likely to get messy. Go, go, go! The last time a section of the camp was shut down, something else for Helen to worry about, along with the next lorry, the next meal, the next assault.
Her mind was always going. There's no break for her mind.
Is that so there's no time to rest
يعرف
or relax?
ስለዚህ ላንቺ የረፍት ሰዓት የለም ለመዝናኛ ጊዜ.
And that's what's striking talking to children here. No time for doing what they do best. Daydream.
Well, with me now to discuss what should be done about Calais and the unaccompanied child refugees there is Charlie Elphicke, the Conservative MP for Dover, and the actor Juliet Stevenson. Juliet Stevenson first. The Home Secretary has now accepted that the UK has a moral duty to take child refugees who have a legal entitlement to be here. You collared the Immigration Minister this week. Are you hopeful now of a deal?
I think we're cautiously hopeful, yeah. I mean, we very much welcome the fact that Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, has made this shift and is talking with great commitment now about getting a number of children over. But I think the caution is because we'll celebrate when they're actually here. There is quite a lot to do between talking about it and actually making sure those children are safeguarded and arrive here. It's very short amount of time because the camp will be demolished on Monday.
So what are the consequences if the UK government doesn't?
Well, I mean, you saw from that report that what children do is they panic, you know, they don't know what their fate is going to be, so already people are trying to slip away and leave. When the camp was partly demolished earlier this year, 129 children went missing and were not found again. So the great worry at the moment is safeguarding those children while in the lead up to the demolition and making sure that they are held safely until their legal claims can be processed.
Charlie Elphicke, let me put that to you. I mean, 18 children have gone missing, more over the past few weeks and months. And that's truly shocking, isn't it?
It's a real concern, isn't it? But I'm really proud of the fact that Amber Rudd sat down with Bernard Cazeneuve, talked about speeding up the process to identify the children who need to be reunited with their families here in Britain, and it's the right thing to do. And I think Britain is doing it.
But why not doing it?
Well, she is doing it, and we're working as quickly as possible, as your report showed. And Amber Rudd spoke to the House of Commons about it this week, and she showed real concern and real compassion. I was very proud of the position that she's been taking.
Well, are you proud of the fact that it's taken so long, though, to get to this point? I mean, the camp is about to be demolished.
Well, I think it's really important also that France does its bit. I mean, if these children were in Britain, they'd have been in care long ago. This camp would never have come into existence. The traffickers who are behind this would all be in jail. And you have to ask the question, why is more action not being taken by France? How have things got to this stage?
France is at least in part to blame.
They are in part to blame, but I do think that our government has been very slow. I mean, I very much welcome the change, but it is very, very short notice because that demolition of Calais starts on Monday and it's going to be done very fast. They've told us that. And so, you know, and it has been a very long time that, you know, that the government have had on the desk, the Home Secretary has had a list of these 178 children for some months now. But anyway... I mean,
well, September the 2nd, I think, Citizens UK gave those figures, those names, to the Home Secretary's office.
But
why has no action been taken immediately?
Action has been taken. As your report showed, action is being taken, but it is in France, and it does depend upon the French playing ball and being helpful on this and providing the assistance, the list and the details, as the Home Secretary set out to House Commons earlier this week. The other thing is, these people are not...
Let me bring in Juliet Stevenson there.
Well, I think the truth is that the French government have displayed no commitment to the welfare of these children at all throughout the existence of this camp. In fact, the levels of police brutality in Calais have been incredibly shocking. I've been there many times. You have yourself, I know, Charlie, you may have seen the children with injuries, with broken limbs, with their eyes running from tear gas being sprayed in their eyes and so on. They have been terrorised by that police who circle the camp, and I think that the French government are very, very to blame in not having got control of that local brutality and in not having concerned themselves with the welfare of the children. But let's hope that now they can collaborate with the British government and get a move on very, very fast and make sure those children are safeguarded.
And I'd agree with that, and I think also it's very important Britain and France together work to target the people traffickers who are behind this. These
What
children
about
don't just-
targeting the source of the problem, though, and dealing with the problem that is Syria and the conflict that is causing children to flee to this?
And that's why the government is absolutely right to provide places of safety. We spent £2 billion on places of safety near conflict to discourage these people taking these dangerous journeys, which have so often resulted in tragic loss of life. And we've also taken in 20,000 people direct from the conflict zone who are most vulnerable. That's got to be the better thing to do than allowing people to make these dangerous journeys, which, you know, so often end in tragedy and then end up in the awful squalor at the Calais jungle.
You haven't taken nearly 20,000 yet. I mean, we're talking about in several years' time,
Well,
aren't we?
it is happening and it is in process. But the other thing is, bear in mind that the million-odd people we're helping in aid camps close to the Syrian conflict zone. I think that's really important. We're doing more than any other European country.
Yeah, but I think from people on the ground who are working in those refugee camps, the extremely overcrowded conditions are appalling, and we are resting very, very heavily on places like Greece and Italy, who, as we know, are already struggling to cope with their own very broken economies, to cope with the numbers of refugees. So I think
MPs in Kent say their councils are struggling and the resources are not there to deal with an influx of refugees.
Well, we know that Kent is struggling, and I have some sympathy, you know, that Kent has borne the brunt of people arriving there and having to... The childcare services in Kent are very, very overburdened, because I think we haven't yet found a way of registering these children and ensuring that they are dispersed to other councils around the country. So Kent has had an unfair share of the responsibility for that, yeah.
Well, we're looking after a quarter of all the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in this country, about 1,500 children. It has putting massive pressure on Kent. And I put this week, press the Home Secretary, could she take more action to make other councils do their bit and take their fair share of responsibility?
I'm really sorry, we're completely out of time. Charlie Elphicke, Juliet Stevenson, thank you very much for joining us. Matt.
Cathy. After the break, every little detail, we meet the rebel choreographer Michael Clark, who mixes up ballet with rock, punk and pop.
Welcome back. Now, Michael Clark was a prodigy of the Royal Ballet School, but his compulsive rebelliousness led him to set up his own dance company, mixing up the genre with punk, rock and pop. His show, To a Simple Rock and Roll Song, is on now at London's Barbican, where I went to meet him.
The fleeting moment of dance. It's a memory.
Stands a solitary candle.
I get very excited about that feeling of being outside of myself, and I'm sure to watch that, to witness that, is probably quite exciting.
Michael, I've got to ask first, what is the wig about? Is that part of the show? Is that part of you? What's going on there?
I think it became part of me playing the part of being a choreographer. When you create a persona, you can behave in all sorts of ways that you wouldn't normally. I guess Lee Bowery introduced that notion to me by dressing me exactly like himself.
All these influences in your show, Bowie, Satie, Patti Smith, what's going on there?
Well, of course, my point of view would be that they're the best. I mean, they're the people. I try to work with people who have very strong ideas of their own. I feel like that thickens the whole plot. If I'm working with people with equally strong ideas, rather than people who serve me.
When you think about the fact that Bowery, Bowie, Alexander McQueen have all passed away, there's a sense, in a way, isn't there, of these sort of icons passing. Do you feel that a kind of generation of those kind of rebel geniuses have moved on?
No. I mean, it does happen. That is part of life. And those people I was thinking about earlier embrace death through their work in their life. I mean, Lee he had that skull on his head for quite a long time. And it is a matter of, I think making art, what I make, it is a matter of life and death to me. And that isn't being dramatic, that is kind of, my life depends on me making work. If I didn't, I would probably die. If you saw me like during the night here on my own in the studio and the results the next day, yeah, I do throw myself into things to see what might happen, not in a way that's going to kill me. But I'm kind of, I wouldn't ask my dancers to put themselves into that danger, but I feel like it's part of my job.
Let yourself go.
Is there something to do with the sort of perfectionism that you have and that you have to be a brilliant dancer, that also the other side of that coin is the obsessional qualities that drive you to drugs or alcohol? Is there?
I wish everyone else had the obsessional qualities that I have, because I was the sort of dancer who, I still do it now, if I'm doing something on stage, I will be doing it repeatedly in the wings all night, all day and all night, to make sure that I've got it perfectly. No one else seems to do that.
So that frustrates you, that?
Well, no, I guess I'm old school in that way. One can find something that's very new and alien can become something that it becomes part of your vocabulary, and that's exciting, I think.
Michael Clarke, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Wish I could dance like that.
Same here. Goodbye. Thanks for watching. Have a good evening.
Good evening.